Berserk is a series that became famous because of its focus on dark rituals. The Eclipse is one of the darkest rituals in fictional history, and the Incarnation Ceremony was worse than the Eclipse in so many ways, and even the triggering of the Great Roar of the Astral World was the culmination of a ritual that started when Femto obtained a body of flesh and became Griffith once more. But believe it or not, the darkest ritual in Berserk is something we haven't even seen yet. There's one ritual that the series has been building up to since the Golden Age, and it has the potential to be the worst thing to ever happen in Berserk history. In this video, we're going to explore Griffith's impending wedding to Princess Charlotte and how it could signal the end of the world. It's going to be a good one, but before we get into this explanation, we do have a very quick request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. She's been his target since day one. Why Griffith needs Princess Charlotte. Ever since the Kingdom of Midland was introduced to the story, it's been pretty clear to us that Princess Charlotte was Griffith's primary target. The Falcon debuted as the leader of an undefeated mercenary band, but it was clear since the beginning that being a mercenary wasn't the full extent of his ambition. Griffith's dream was to become a king, and being a mercenary leader was just the first step towards that dream. He needed to garner a reputation as a war general without peer because that was his only path to peerage. A commoner could never hope to marry a princess because political marriages can only be made between members of the nobility. If you aren't someone with a title, you have no chance of marrying someone else with a title, let alone a princess. But there's one exception to this rule, and that exception is if you're insanely skilled at the art of war. Warfare is the primary method through which a political organization sustains and increases its territory, influence, wealth, you name it. It's also about the only thing in medieval society that treats commoners and nobles exactly the same way. It doesn't matter if you're the son of a peasant or the son of a lord, if you aren't skilled enough on the battlefield, then death will come for you first. And that's part of the reason why mercenaries exist. People tend to hear the word mercenary and think of glorious battles being fought for loot and renown, but not everything is a warband reference. The primary reason kingdoms hire mercenaries is to pad their own losses. That's because mercenary groups specialize in the art of war, and even if they aren't as good as a kingdom's regular army, supplementing your numbers with theirs ensures that your supplicants stay safe for longer. Yes, they cost money, but not all mercenary groups are always flowing with cash flow. Any group's financial success depends on their field record and their reputation. Low-level mercenary bands are often one bad deployment away from becoming bandits, and if you're good at fighting but bad at leading, you could find yourself stuck in recruitment hell forever. So really, any kingdom that hires mercenary groups is doing it to increase their chances at victory while reducing their own losses. But that doesn't mean that being a mercenary is completely skewed in the employer's favor. If a band manages to garner itself a pristine war record and a fearsome reputation, it can cause major changes within the political structure of the world, because such a power can never stay independent for long. Eventually, it's bound to be noticed by the major players, and it will be contacted by them, which can result in one of three things. First, the group can be considered a hostile threat because of its popularity and wiped out by paranoid rulers. Second, the group itself can resist all challenges and create a kingdom of its own, which is unlikely but not entirely impossible. And third, a kingdom in need of strong allies will join forces with the mercenary group in exchange for major concessions, because without their power, the kingdom wouldn't survive for too long. Griffith knew that it was this third category of people whose eye he had to draw because desperation makes people quite open-handed and vulnerable. If he played his cards right and managed to keep his war record unblemished during a major campaign, then it was possible he'd get access to peerage through bloodshed alone. As sickening as it sounds, war was the best business in the medieval age, and Griffith, ladies and gentlemen, was the Warren Buffett of this game. In the very first chapter of Berserk, we see him saving the life of the king who has decided to hedge all his bets on the Falcons. The King of Midland, one of the oldest kingdoms in the world, whose royal house claimed descent from Supreme King Gysric himself, was an astute and wise ruler. He had all the right words for the right occasions, and he'd created the right political alliances to bring his kingdom out of a centuries-long slump. When we see his first interaction with Griffith, we learn that he's a man who's willing to overlook the pettiness that one's birth brings into affairs so long as his kingdom prospers. He openly admits to wanting to work with Griffith because of his merits as a tested and proven war leader, where he'd come to see the pitfalls of sticking with tradition. But if he wanted to solidify his name in the history books, the king needed to do something major, and that meant winning the 100-Year War. The Tudor Empire has been thrashing Midland for a century after capturing one of their key fortresses, and it was for the purpose of finally barely defeating them that they hired the Band of the Falcon. They had heard of the Falcon's undefeated war record and seen their work for other kingdoms and nations bringing success and prosperity to them. The king hoped that by taking on a maverick like Griffith, he'd be able to inspire his own court to do better, because it was overflowing with incompetent sycophants at that moment. Though Midland had a storied heritage, its competency was a different story. The Midland High Command was more concerned with preserving their tradition and nobility than improving its performance on the battlefield. This led to an astonishing number of losses in the first numbered chapter of Berserk alone. But just as the king was despairing his situation, the Band of the Falcon swooped in and defeated one of Tudor's elite military units, justifying his faith in an upstart like Griffith. He probably thought that giving Griffith the title of Viscount was his own idea, because a shakeup like that would surely open the eyes of the lords and ladies around him. The king would no longer be bound to old traditions in terms of advancing people within his court, and if they didn't step their game up, they'd be left behind. But the king wasn't aware of the fact that he was just playing right into Griffith's hands. He knew that a kingdom as vulnerable as Midland couldn't afford to lose him at a time like this, so all he had to do was keep doing his job, and a title would soon follow. As a mercenary band leader, he didn't have the standing to marry one of the fine ladies of the royal court, but as a Viscount, Griffith was now an eligible and desirable bachelor of the realm. We're sure many a maiden would have given their father's castle to tie him down, but becoming Viscount was a means to an end for Griffith. We're pretty sure that there were other kingdoms in the world that were in a position similar to Midland. When Vritannis was preparing to fight the Kushan Empire, we were told several members of its alliance had only recently called truces with each other or separated into individual nations and states. These places had been fighting one another for several years, so Griffith could have signed up the Falcons for one of them, but he chose Midland not only because it was a great and historic nation in peril, he also did it because Midland was one of the few kingdoms that didn't have a male heir. In medieval times, the laws of inheritance dictated that the first son of a ruler would inherit the throne and their belongings, no matter how many daughters they had before them. It was possible to legitimize a daughter's claim to the throne, but doing so was quite rare because daughters were inherently vulnerable from a political standpoint. That's why Griffith was shocked when he found out that the king's only child was a daughter who was 16 years old. Such a thing was unheard of, especially in a place with the kind of influence Midland had, and he figures out the unsavory reason behind this situation later on in the story, but because that's not relevant to this specific detail, we won't get into it. Suffice to say that if you've read Berserk, then you know what we're talking about, and if you've seen Game of Thrones, you get most of what we're talking about. But keeping the king's disturbing reasons aside, the fact that his only child was a female gave Griffith the perfect opportunity to fast-track accomplishing his dream. If he chose the traditional route to kingship, which would involve conquest and probably taking up many years of his life, then there was no guarantee whether he'd even become king in the first place. If said conquest took even a decade away from him, then the amount of time he'd get as a ruler would be significantly less, considering the average lifespan of human beings at the time. Griffith isn't the kind of guy who has that much patience. He always looks for the quickest and most efficient method of accomplishing a task, and if that means he needs to sell his body to a lecherous rich man, then so be it. Griffith slept with a diddler just to fund his warband and make it large enough to rival proper armies, so you best believe he was on the lookout for a kingdom just like Midland. Once he got his foot in the door with the peerage, he immediately got to work on his real target, aka the Princess of Midland, Lady Charlotte. Charlotte was your typical sheltered royal princess. She didn't know life outside of her father's city, and she was likely never going to enjoy things like a fairy tale romance. One of Griffith's natural gifts was being able to read people easily, and after meeting her for the first time, he knew that winning her over would be a piece of cake. Griffith adapted his words and demeanor to match Charlotte's expectations from a knight in shining armor, and he let his dashing good looks do the rest. Now, we know how objectifying that sounds, but you guys haven't had the full Griffith experience. It's an intoxicating thing, and his natural charm and charisma take him a long way with the ladies, even when he isn't trying. With Charlotte, he was definitely trying because she was the key to the whole thing. We're sure he was prepared with several months worth of courtship plans, but in the end, getting Charlotte to fall for him wasn't that difficult because Griffith got some unexpected help from an unexpected source. The Band of the Falcon was chosen to protect the king and his family for the annual autumn hunt over Griffith's main political and military rival, and he was already making decent progress in flirting with Charlotte by showing her what a leaf whistle is. But then, he was helped by a boar that startled her horse, and when he chased her down and calmed her steed, fate decided to play nice as well. Griffith's rival, Count Julius, had hired a man from the royal army to assassinate Griffith with a poisoned crossbow bolt to stop his ascension through the kingdom's ranks. The assassin chose the moment Griffith was with a vulnerable Charlotte to attack him, and though he technically didn't miss his shot, he missed it in the way that mattered most because he couldn't kill Griffith. Turns out, the Falcon's weird charm necklace protected him by tanking the bolt, and instead of diminishing his standing in the royal court, Julius ended up enhancing it. The king and the rest of the high command assumed the assassination attempt was directed towards Charlotte, and Griffith was hailed as the defender of Midland's princess. To ensure things stayed that way, the Falcon dispatched Guts to take care of Julius permanently, because not only was he trying to protect himself from future assassination attempts, he also needed to get rid of political rivals as quickly as possible. Julius wouldn't have mattered to Griffith if he was just another noble from Midland, but because he was the general of Midland's highest army division and the brother of the king, that meant that, barring acts of God and treason, Julius would inherit the throne as his brother's oldest male heir. After his death, that title would pass on to Julius's son Adonis, who was Charlotte's cousin, and only after Adonis's death would she herself be named heir to the throne in an official capacity. Griffith dispatched Guts to take care of Julius first because Adonis was still a child and not an immediate threat if he played Charlotte like a fiddle, and to give himself a cover story, he attended a ball being thrown by the princess on the very night he scheduled the assassination. This not only threw suspicion off him, it also gave him a chance for a direct conversation with the princess, which is something he deemed possible after studying her behavior and character during the hunt. While they talked, Griffith dazzled her with his ideology on life and was about to tell her what his dream was when news arrived of Guts' success. Count Julius had died in an attack his guards believed to have been orchestrated by robbers, but his son Adonis had died in the process as well. While this wasn't part of Griffith's instructions to Guts, it played into his plans perfectly, so while Charlotte cried over the loss of her relatives, Griffith cracked open one of the coldest grins we've ever seen on his face. Knowing him, he would have sent someone after Adonis eventually, but thanks to Guts, he didn't need to worry about that anymore. Now that the king didn't have any living male heirs, he would be forced to designate Charlotte as his successor, and that's when Griffith's dream would be a hair's breadth away from being fulfilled. If he married the Queen of Midland, he'd become king consort, and while king consorts rarely have vast political power, depending on how he played his cards, Griffith could certainly be an exception to that rule. All he needed to do was keep pandering to Charlotte while preserving his record and repute as an unmatched military commander. Being a Viscount wasn't enough to make him a suitable match for the princess, but becoming a general of Midland would have cinched the deal because that was the title held by Count Julius as well. A general commands great respect from nobles and commoners alike, and a general would have the military and political standing to merit being considered as king consort. Griffith took care of that promotion by securing the target that started the 100-Year War in the first place, aka the Fortress of Doldry. Doldry was said to be impregnable because of its natural defenses and its unreal garrison capacity. A kingdom could station 50,000 men at the castle, and it wouldn't be a disservice to it because all of those men would only add to its defenses. In fact, the Tudor Empire had stationed the Purple Rhino Knights, their highest knightly order, at Doldry because it was the key to winning the war. If Doldry fell, Tudor would be open to massive incursions from Midland, so keeping it out of enemy hands was Tudor's primary objective. Griffith pulled off a magnificent deception to retrieve it from enemy hands by luring the Purple Rhino Knights into the field and then sending in a splinter force to secure the castle. By securing Doldry, he brought an end to the 100-Year War because it forced Midland and Tudor into a permanent stalemate. He was also promoted to the rank of White Phoenix General, with all his captains being granted the rank of knights because the king wanted Griffith to be the centerpiece of his military moving forward. With the unbeatable White Falcon by his side, Midland would soon be on its way to reclaiming the top spot in the world, or at least that's what the king believed. For Griffith, this promotion was one of the last steps he needed to secure his target, because now he was free to pursue Charlotte however he wanted. He'd already endeared himself to her by becoming her savior, but he knew that he had her love when she gave him the male half of a couple's lodestone to carry into the Battle of Doldry. He could have taken his sweet time getting Charlotte herself to propose a marriage between her and Griffith, and if this happened in a public place, the king wouldn't be able to deny her. After Doldry, the White Falcon was seen as the savior of Midland. The commoners idolized him, and the court, at least the ones that escaped Griffith's wrath, were swaying in his favor. He had the support of rising nobles like Lords Laban and Owen, and sooner rather than later, Griffith would become politically invincible. Denying his daughter's request to marry his kingdom's savior would have put the king in a terrible spot, especially if the real reason behind him keeping Charlotte were to come out. I know we said we weren't going to talk about it, but we're going to mention it really quickly here because it's now relevant. The King of Midland had incestuous feelings for his daughter. He was hoping beyond fond hope that by isolating her and treating her well, he'd get her to naturally fall in love with him someday, and then he could marry her without hesitation. But Griffith, being the big brain that he is, figured out that this was the case, and if he'd used this information wisely, he'd have achieved his dream a long time ago. The only reason he couldn't capitalize on the perfect storm he created was his own hubris, because just when everything was falling into place, Guts decided to quit the Falcons. This made Griffith go on an unprecedented downward spiral where he cast his dreams into the fire with his own hands while blaming Guts for the same. He decided to move up his timeline on seducing Charlotte by making a move on her the very night Guts split with the Falcons, and while the seduction itself worked, Griffith's overarching plans failed. Turns out, a maid saw him with Charlotte during the night, and she informed the king of the Falcons' treason. The king reacted by imprisoning Griffith and having him tortured for a year, which laid the groundwork for the Eclipse. Maybe Griffith could have escaped this fate had he not taunted the king with the truth about his incestuous feelings, but at that point in his life, he saw no benefit to withholding such leverage. Griffith was truly lost in the sauce, and the result of that is something we've discussed a lot on this channel. But here's the funny thing about how fate works in Berserk. Even though sleeping with Charlotte derailed his dream and made it crash into a ravine, it also weirdly worked out for Griffith because it solidified the princess's feelings for him. When he was broken out of his prison in the Tower of Rebirth, it was Princess Charlotte who acted as a guide for his rescuers, and she was even willing to abandon her family, her wealth, and her title for him. It was only because he told her to stay back that she even agreed to do it in the first place, and besides, a princess without a title was of no use to Griffith. He might have begged the princess, but if she abdicated her title, then that would render all of his plans useless. The very reason he worked his magic on her was so that he could marry her and then claim the throne of Midland, but his torture, the escape from Midland, and his subsequent ascension into a God-Hand member threw a massive wrench into those plans. As a metaphysical entity, he had no way of returning to Midland and sorting things out in his favor because the God-Hand operates strictly within the Astral World. Yes, he gained immense power and knowledge by becoming a part of them, but it also separated him from the very world he wanted to rule over since he was a little boy. If Griffith wanted to become King of Earth, then he had to find a way to rekindle things with Charlotte without raising suspicions about where he was or what he was doing for the time that he operated as a full-fledged God-Hand member, because that would be the quickest path to fulfilling his dream. And Griffith proved that the devil's luck was a real thing in Berserk because he was granted the opportunity to do just that on a silver platter. The ultimate checkmate. How Griffith secured Charlotte's hand. Griffith coming back to Earth and going straight for Charlotte is something that was hinted at way back in chapter 127. Part of the Revelations trilogy, it focused on the dying king of Midland who had a dream about Charlotte and Griffith right before he passed away. At this point in the story, Charlotte was aware of her father's true feelings for her, and she disowned him because of that. Ever since the day Griffith was imprisoned, she distanced herself from him and prayed for her falcon's safe return because in her mind, he was the only one who could rescue her. No matter how much the king tried making amends for his actions, Charlotte remained adamant in her denial of him and her worship of Griffith, and the king's death dream revealed that this was all part of the God-Hand's master plan. In that dream, the king was sitting in the middle of a cold land on his throne. As he shivered, walls surrounded him, guards showed up to protect him, but none of them gave him the warmth that would help him survive. That changed when a silhouette of Charlotte appeared because, in his own sick way, he still considered her to be the light of his life. The king reached out for his daughter to save himself from freezing to death, but just then, a massive white falcon put its wings around her. As this falcon adjusted to human size, its face became a silhouette of Griffith's, and this was shocking enough to make the king flatline. What this moment represents is Griffith's ultimate victory over the king of Midland, because with his death, Charlotte was now queen. And considering the fact that she continues to worship him over her own father, Griffith doesn't need to worry about whether he can rekindle his romance with her, he just needs to do it at some point in the near future. That time arrives shortly after this dream is depicted, when the Kushan Empire invades Midland around the same time as the Incarnation Ceremony. Charlotte is imprisoned in the Tower of Rebirth by the Kushan Emperor Ganishka, who keeps her there for weeks and gives her sewing material to distract herself with while he conquers the western half of the world. It's during the Kushan conquest that Griffith returns to Earth via the Incarnation Ceremony, and the first thing he does is get right back on track with his plans for world domination. He leverages his status as the savior of Midland and the mystery surrounding his disappearance to re-enter that role, and this time he doesn't need an army to work work his magic. As a God Hand member, he has more power than any living being on Earth, and his mere presence attracts an army of apostles to him on his first day back. Griffith rapidly builds up his forces and names them the Band of the Falcon thanks to public demand, quickly winning back everyone he'd lost 3 years ago. It was like he'd never left Midland or become a demon because the people followed him blindly. They could sense that his war demons weren't human and that they could end up being dangerous to their own safety if they went without food for too long, but they didn't care because Griffith was now perceived as a biblical savior, not just a military one. Some of the deeds he performed in his attempt to help Midland regain its footing were downright miraculous, and before long, people started treating Griffith like the Berserk version of Jesus. His rapidly increasing base of subjects most definitely believed that he had returned at the time of their greatest need to give them salvation, but in reality, Griffith only chose to help Midland liberate itself from the Kushan because he didn't want his groundwork from a few years ago to go to waste. He had entrenched himself within the people's minds as a war hero, giving him instant military repute upon his return. He had the trust of the youngest nobles of Midland, who were now in positions of great political and military importance, and perhaps most importantly, he'd made the one woman he needed most in the world fall for him so hard that she was now knitting angelic portraits of him to cope with imprisonment. As soon as he'd gathered enough soldiers and followers, Griffith sent out a splinter force of apostles to attack Wyndham directly, which was now serving as Ganishka's capital in the west. While his war demons distracted the Dread Emperor, Griffith and Zod broke into the Tower of Rebirth and rescued Queen Charlotte from it, fulfilling yet another fairy tale trope. It's kind of disgusting how good Miura-sensei was at layering these innocent tropes with characters whose moral compasses are broken. The moment when Griffith, a murderer and a rapist, kisses Charlotte's finger to light that spark of love once more should have creeped us out, but it didn't, and it confirmed to Charlotte that her rescue attempt was a dream after all. She'd prayed for this moment, for Griffith's return, for over 2 years, and now that it had happened, she had everything she could have wanted from life. Shortly after Charlotte is brought to the reborn Falcon's encampment, her and Griffith get it on in the safety of her father's absence, and Charlotte decides to make their love official. The next time we see her following her rescue is in the aftermath of the battle for Vritannis, and it's then that Charlotte drops a bombshell on every major lord that is sworn to the faith of the Holy See. See, the first half of this battle took place at night, when Ganishka sent his demon army into Vritannis, and they were thwarted by an unexpected team-up between Guts and Zod's fighting contingents. The pair of beastly swordsmen even managed to injure the intangible Emperor himself, which made Ganishka retreat until the break of dawn. When dawn broke, he attacked Vritannis with his human forces, which considerably outnumbered his own demon army. The Dread Emperor was looking to finish the job he started that morning, but once again his plans were thwarted, this time by the arrival of the man himself. Griffith used his mixed army of human and apostle soldiers to sow chaos within the Kushan ranks and corner the Emperor's mobile palace. He then had a secret conversation with him where he forced Ganishka to retreat to Wyndham so that they could have their final showdown there. After the Kushan army left Vritannis untouched, Griffith came upon all the nobles who had gathered within the city, and they immediately started asking him questions like who gave him the authority to command such a large army in the first place. Politics is a den of snakes, and each snake will bite the other while disregarding their own flesh if it means they can make political gains. Everyone in Vritannis wanted to discredit Griffith as quickly as possible because the other option was to accept his superiority over them. He had just accomplished a military feat that should have been impossible, and if the Kushan couldn't stand up to him, then Vritannis' forces couldn't even hope to face him. By threatening his legitimacy, they aimed to remove their most potent political rival, and that's when Charlotte threw those bombshells we were talking about. She revealed that she and Griffith were now betrothed, and that he was the sole commander of Midland's regular army, aka the Band of the Falcon. This outraged several of the nobles because of how improper and non-traditional it was. Many brought up the fact that Midland could do whatever it pleased, but Vritannis' holy alliance was brought together by religion, so the alliance would heed the advice of the Pope. No doubt it was a clever analysis of the situation at hand and an accurate technical assessment of the bureaucratic standards of the time, but then the Pope himself showed up from out of nowhere and threw himself at Griffith's feet, offering him prostration and declaring him the chosen savior of the world. Once the Falcon received this particular designation, he was free to soar however and wherever he wanted, and that's how Griffith's marriage to Queen Charlotte would also be legitimized. In the spirit of fairness, we do want to point out that the Pope was on his deathbed, and his cardinals were already talking about replacements. But then, Griffith appeared within the Pope's psyche in his Falcon form and gave him the purpose of legitimizing Griffith's reign in accordance with the tenets of the Holy See. This seemed to revitalize the dying Pope, who is now more energetic than he's ever been in his entire life, and the reason we keep focusing on the Pope is quite simple. He's the man who will eventually wed Griffith and Charlotte, and now that we've set up literally everything we needed to with regards to why Griffith needed her, how he got her, and how he maintained his grip over her despite not being a physical entity for 2 years, we can finally get into why we're so focused on talking about Griffith's marriage. Because if the reasons were purely political, then we probably would have seen it already. In fact, from a political standpoint, Griffith should have probably married Charlotte the moment Falconia was up and running, because it would give all of his subjects a truly solid foundation to base their lives off of. Royal weddings can feel pointless in times of peace, but in a time of crisis, they can become the glue that unifies the hearts of the people. We think the sudden appearance of magical beasts and a giant glowing tree would definitely qualify as being part of the latter camp, but for some reason, Griffith and Charlotte seem to be in no rush. In fact, the Pope, who has made it his life's purpose to preside over their wedding, seems to be more interested in the ceremony than the betrothed themselves. Well, that's only half true. We're sure if you asked Charlotte, she'd want to marry Griffith in a chapel in the rundown areas of Falconia, because that's how deep her love and devotion go. So really, the only person we can think of who's holding up the process is Griffith. But why would he do such a thing when he's worked his entire life to get to this point? All of his rivals are either dead or forced onto his side, whether that's through his literal magnetic personality or some other device. He doesn't have to worry about the king's permission because Charlotte is queen and she's already accepted his proposal. Hell, he's in charge of the strongest military force in the world, and he could become king tomorrow by force if he wanted. Yet, even after obtaining every symbol and title of legitimacy, Griffith is still biding his time. He's had premarital sex with Charlotte, evident from their tryst right before he disappears off to Elfhelm as the Moonlight Boy, but he hasn't married her yet. So what exactly is it that's keeping Griffith from putting that ring on her finger and making it official? Well, if you ask us, there's only one thing important enough to a demon to make him put off the most important event of his life when he could trigger it at any moment, and that's the preparation for a ritual. A dark wedding for the ages. Why, this might be the darkest Berserk ritual ever. This has happened before in Berserk. Well, not a dark wedding ceremony, but the delay of an extremely important demonic ritual. Ganishka mutating into his Shiva form was the first time we saw an apostle transcend beyond their original transformation, which most of them probably don't even know is an option, but it wasn't supposed to play out like that. The first person to go through a double ascension was supposed to be the Slug Count, but when he sacrificed his soul to save his daughter, the God Hand moved to a contingency plan for triggering the Great Roar. That plan took a year to fulfill because it needed readjustment on a causal level. See, the God Hand likes to proclaim that causality is this thing set in stone, but even they know that that's not the case. There are times where certain people are able to make leaps beyond causality's bounds, but the reason the God Hand doesn't care about that is simple. Things eventually return to the status quo one way or another, aka right back in their palms. They lost the Slug Count to a father's love, but they regained their twice reincarnated in Ganishka when he entered Daiba's man-made Behelit. That process took time, and it likely experienced several delays over the course of the centuries, but eventually it worked. Causality-related business has a way of converging on you without your knowledge, which Guts has experienced numerous times to his displeasure. But the reason we're highlighting this is to tell you guys that usually, when a person has everything they need to achieve their dream, and they just keep delaying it, it's for one of two reasons. The first is performance anxiety, because tying that knot and donning the crown will make everything real in a way that it just isn't at the moment. Right now, Griffith is chasing being king, but once he actually marries Charlotte, he'll be ruling and passing judgment in an official capacity. The pressure of being at the top of the food chain can get to a lot of extremely skilled individuals and cause them to make errors that they usually wouldn't make. But Griffith isn't that kind of guy, at least generally speaking. The other reason a person keeps delaying taking an important step towards achieving their dreams when it's in their reach is because they need something to happen before they take that last step. And this is why we think Griffith is putting his marriage to Charlotte off, because he needs something to happen before he makes it official. As for what that thing is, considering the fact that this amount of patience is being exhibited by a demon, we can't imagine it being anything good. But we can imagine its trigger mechanism. Griffith and Charlotte's actual wedding ceremony. A dark wedding with a sacrificial bride is a rather played-out trope, but considering the way that things have played out in Berserk, it would be apropos that the story heads in that direction. From the very beginning, Griffith has never seen Charlotte as a person. He sees her as a means to an end, and that end is becoming the king of all mankind, and then all things in existence. He compliments her sweets and supports her ideas for starting an orphanage, not because he genuinely loves those things, but because he'll do anything to keep her happy and in love with him. even when we see their interactions after they're betrothed, they always come off as awkward and formal, not because of Charlotte, but because of Griffith. Miura just had this way of drawing his fake smile with a subtlety that was also evident to those who knew the bastard, that gave away his actual feelings towards Charlotte. Griffith told Guts a long time ago that he no longer has feelings. His heart is frozen, and that's the truth. The one time he randomly saved Casca wasn't because he wanted to do it, it was the demon child operating through their shared vessel. The entity known as Griffith is devoid of every human feeling except one, the one that makes him keep pursuing his dream. He'd probably go Tech Knight on a cactus if it meant he'd become Emperor of the Universe, so keeping up a facade with Charlotte is child's play for him. What's concerning isn't the fact that he's deceiving her, but that he's also putting people she might recognize pretty close to her. So far, no one from the old band of the Falcon has shown up in Falconia except that one kid named Rickard. He slapped Griffith right in front of Charlotte and then rejected joining him in his conquest/liberation of the world. Charlotte saw that, so surely she's questioning how and why someone would reject her pristine white falcon, especially one of his former allies. And then there's the little problem of Casca now being in Falconia as well. Out of every Band of the Falcon member that Charlotte interacted with, only Guts, Griffith, and Casca are alive. Moreover, Casca knows the truth about Griffith, and she isn't fully under his control just yet. During her imprisonment in Falconia, she's being kept under a spell that makes her believe she's always been a part of the city, but this spell keeps breaking and Casca keeps trying to escape. Charlotte once personally charged Casca with protecting Griffith during the battle for Doldry, and the princess was directly in contact with her during her beloved's imprisonment. If Charlotte finds out what happened to Casca during the Eclipse, and the real reason Griffith was able to regain his physical mobility, it would yank the rug from underneath the Falcon, because we can't imagine Charlotte being too thrilled with the revelation that she's sleeping with a demon. And yet, Griffith insists on making long-term plans about the future of Falconia, talking about educating the masses and creating a disciplined army from refugees, instead of putting to bed a matter that can be resolved in a single day and night. What we think is happening here is that Griffith is biding his time for the right moment. Berserk is a story that unfolds in threes. Miura was a massive fan of George Lucas, claiming to have learned storytelling from him, and classic George Lucas films always unfold in 3 acts. When it comes to Griffith's character, sacrifice is a major theme, and that's what we think awaits the attendees of his wedding. So far, we've seen him facilitate 2 major sacrifices. The first was the old band of the Falcon, which made him a god hand with the Eclipse. The second was at the Incarnation Ceremony, where hundreds of people died so he could get himself a fancy new skin suit. The rule of 3 acts would dictate that a final sacrifice needs to be made by Griffith to truly fulfill his dream, and that sacrifice will occur at his wedding to Charlotte. This is why he's putting it off, because he needs time to prepare and fulfill all its conditions. A mass sacrifice occurring on his wedding day has already been foreshadowed by some highly suggestive dialogue from the Pope. In a scene from the Falconia chapters, we see Charlotte telling the Pope to take it easy because not long ago he was ready to kick the bucket, and now he's working overtime, blessing everyone in Falconia like he's a recent convert. The Pope tells her not to worry though, because he wasn't going to die until he performed the sacred duty of marrying her to Griffith. The fact that the Pope already knows he's going to die after the ceremony sounds poetic until you realize that it might in fact be literal. Ever since he returned to the physical world, we haven't heard Griffith's internal dialogue much. In fact, there's only one chapter in which he laid out his true goal explicitly, and it's the chapter where he accepts Mule Wolfflame into his service. As part of his whole Jesus act, Griffith allows the souls of soldiers who have died under his banner to meet their family members one last time. After saying their goodbyes, he then sends those souls into a place where they become quote-unquote one. The language here is deliberately ambiguous, but that one place can only be the Vortex of Souls, considering who and what Griffith is. The Vortex is considered to be a power source and a prison for the God Hand because it's part of their very being. So, if Griffith's goal is to make everything and everyone into, well, one, then that implies he wants to send every human soul into the abyss. His marriage would be a great trigger for this from narrative perspective, because this would hold up a dark mirror to the first eclipse. During the first eclipse, Void killed Skull Knight's lover and severed the physical world from the astral world with the power of the abyss, which lurked in the background. Now, Griffith will marry a woman who loves him and open a gaping hole in the world that will devour everything and everyone until they all become one. By doing this, Griffith will be able to achieve his dream as well, because he's a part of the very fabric of human consciousness. And if we're being honest with you guys, we're hoping that the wedding kiss will also give Charlotte some justice, because that girl is giving Griffith too much trust and time. The way we picture it, after the Pope does his thing, Griffith and Charlotte kiss, and she sees his real face as Femto. Maybe she even gets a highlight reel of his worst atrocities, because thought transference is a thing, you know? Once they're married, Griffith will have no further need of her or anyone else who knows what he's done to get to where he's at. And if we're being honest with ourselves for a minute, we've always thought that Falconia was never meant to replace Geiseric's sunken city, it was meant to be its second coming. Griffith has already packed enough people into that city to fuel several eclipses, and we can't shake the feeling that they're all meant to be sacrifices. That's just how it goes with the God Hand, after all. You're useful until you're not, at which point you're sacrificed, and you become fuel for the God Hand. But even if we're completely wrong and nothing bad happens at Griffith and Charlotte's wedding, it would still be a dark day in human history because it would legitimize the rule of a demon over them. Here's the thing about the current state of Falconia. There are dozens of apostles hungry for human flesh crammed into the area called Pandemonium, and they're all just waiting for Master to loosen the leash just a bit. Many of them have already behaved insubordinately because they're missing human flesh, and even if the Abyss itself doesn't show up, the wedding could be a trigger for a unilateral apostle-led slaughter. After all, they would make better subjects than humans because of their instinctive servitude to the God Hand. So, whichever path the team at Studio Gaga decides to take us on with regards to Griffith's wedding, one thing is clear. The destination won't be pretty, and in fact, it might just act as the signal of the end of the world. This mass ritual will be the darkest thing we ever see, and for a series that has the Eclipse, the Lost Children arc, and Wild, that's saying something indeed. Marvelous verdict! But as for this video, that's all we got for you guys. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below because we think this topic isn't discussed enough. Griffith and Charlotte's dynamic is so convoluted that one could write a thesis on it, but we think we covered that ground with this video. As always, like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys real soon. Until then, stay safe, and as always, keep on struggling, strugglers.